Incest is one of humanity's deepest taboos, a subject whispered about with shame yet woven into the very fabric of history. From myths of gods who married their siblings to kings who risked blood and dynasty for power, it has shaped laws, religions, and even the survival of civilizations. It is a story of desire, fear, control, and consequence, a mirror reflecting how humans defined family and morality. To understand incest is not to excuse it, but to confront the uncomfortable truths of our past. And those truths begin far earlier than we might imagine. Incest refers to intimate or marital relationships between people who are closely related by blood, such as siblings, parents, and children, or other close family members. In most modern societies, it is treated as one of the strongest taboos, something both legally prohibited and morally condemned. Yet history shows a more complicated picture. Across time, incest has appeared again and again in different cultures, sometimes hidden in myth, sometimes written directly into law, and at other times practiced openly by kings and rulers. The contradiction is striking. On one side, a near-universal rule that warns against it, and on the other side, repeated exceptions where societies justified it for reasons of power, religion, or survival. The persistence of this practice tells us something important about how humans have tried to manage family ties, inheritance, and the idea of purity across generations. To understand the story of incest is to understand a part of the story of human civilization itself. But was it always seen as taboo? To find out, we need to go back to the very beginning. In prehistoric times, before written laws or organized religions, humans already showed signs of avoiding close-kin relationships. Early Homo sapiens lived in small groups, yet they often exchanged partners with neighboring groups rather than marrying within their own. This behavior was not based on formal rules but on survival instinct. Inbreeding, or reproduction within very close relatives, increases the chances of passing on harmful genetic traits. Weakness, deformities, or diseases could threaten the survival of an entire small band. So avoiding incest became an unspoken rule shaped by natural selection. Over time, this instinct was reinforced by simple kinship systems where people began to recognize who counted as too close to marry. Anthropologists suggest that even among hunter-gatherer societies, some form of early regulation existed to protect genetic health and group stability. These beginnings laid the foundation for the cultural and moral rules that would later develop in larger civilizations. Once humans began forming larger settlements, rules around family and marriage became even more crucial. In the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, family ties were closely linked with power and property. Among ordinary people, marriage between close relatives was generally discouraged, but within royal families a different logic applied. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians sometimes permitted rulers to marry sisters or other close kin in order to keep wealth and authority concentrated within a single bloodline. By marrying within their own family, kings could limit rival claims and ensure that the throne passed only to their direct descendants. Alongside this political reasoning, myths and religious traditions also gave a sense of legitimacy to incest. Some Mesopotamian deities were described as siblings or close relatives who married one another, reinforcing the idea that divine blood was too sacred to be diluted. These stories helped normalize what was otherwise viewed as unacceptable in wider society. For the ruling class, incest became a calculated strategy, while for ordinary citizens it remained a moral and social boundary. This double standard highlights how strongly power could bend cultural rules when it served dynastic interests. If Mesopotamia made incest political, Egypt turned it into something sacred. In ancient Egypt, incest within the royal family was not only accepted but often expected. Pharaohs commonly married their sisters or even daughters, a practice designed to preserve what they believed was a divine bloodline. Unlike Mesopotamia, where incest was mainly political, the Egyptians gave it a religious justification. According to their mythology, the gods Isis and Osiris were both siblings and spouses, setting a sacred model for rulers to follow. By imitating the gods, pharaohs could claim a closer connection to the divine and strengthen their authority in the eyes of their people. This practice, however, came with heavy costs. Modern studies of mummies, including that of Tutankhamun, reveal genetic disorders and physical weaknesses caused by generations of inbreeding. Tutankhamun himself likely suffered from deformities linked to incestuous parentage. For the Egyptians, maintaining the purity of the royal family outweighed the biological dangers, showing how ideology could override natural risks. What seemed holy to them would later appear tragic to us. Yet Egypt was not alone. Across the Mediterranean, another empire wrestled with incest differently. In ancient Greece, incest often appeared in myths rather than everyday life. The most famous story is that of Oedipus, who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother, a tragedy that symbolized both fate and the dangers of violating family boundaries. Such tales warned against incest, but they also revealed how deeply it haunted the Greek imagination. In Rome, the rules were stricter. Roman law enforced exogamy, meaning marriage outside close kin was required to maintain social order and prevent family conflict. However, even Rome's elite sometimes bent the rules when power was at stake. Emperor Claudius, for example, married his niece Agrippina, a union that shocked many but was justified politically. Alongside legal restrictions, both Greece and Rome practiced symbolic forms of incest in religious rituals. Some sacred marriages reenacted unions between gods, reflecting divine myths while stopping short of true blood relations. This balance of prohibition, exception, and symbolism shows how incest remained a tension point in classical society. If Rome largely condemned it, Persia on the other hand took a radically different stance. In ancient Persia, particularly under Zoroastrian influence, incest was not only permitted in some cases but even praised as a virtuous act. The practice was known as xwedodah, which referred to marriage between close relatives such as siblings, parents and children, or cousins. Unlike most cultures that condemned such unions, Zoroastrian texts described them as spiritually beneficial. The reasoning was that close-kin marriages reflected cosmic purity and brought people nearer to Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. By uniting family members, the practice was believed to strengthen spiritual ties and preserve sacred order. However, historians and scholars debate how widespread xwedodah actually was. Some argue that it remained mostly an ideal promoted in religious texts rather than a common social practice, while others believe it had real influence among Persian elites. Whatever its true extent, the fact that it was religiously justified shows how cultural context could completely change the meaning of incest. Across the ocean in the Americas, rulers also used incest for divine legitimacy. In the Inca Empire, incest was closely tied to religion and royalty. The Sapa Inca, considered the child of the sun, often married his own sister to preserve what was seen as a sacred bloodline. By keeping the royal family united through sibling marriage, the Incas reinforced their claim of direct descent from Inti, the sun god. This divine connection gave rulers unquestioned authority and separated them from ordinary people. Unlike in some other societies, incest in the Inca world was not widespread but reserved almost exclusively for the royal family. For common citizens, the practice was forbidden, making it a privilege and responsibility of those who claimed to embody divine power. The strategy maintained a sense of purity and legitimacy at the top, even though it risked the same genetic problems faced by other dynasties. To the Incas, however, the sacred bond outweighed any danger. Meanwhile in Asia, attitudes toward incest shifted dramatically under the weight of philosophy and law. In early China, especially during the Shang dynasty, sibling marriages among the ruling class were recorded as a way of maintaining power within the royal household. These unions echoed practices seen in other ancient civilizations, where kings and queens sought to keep authority concentrated in one family line. However, attitudes began to shift with the rise of the Zhou dynasty and the influence of Confucian philosophy. Confucian teachings placed strong emphasis on family roles, hierarchy, and moral order. Incest, which blurred the lines between parent, child, and sibling responsibilities, was seen as disruptive to the natural structure of society. Over time, prohibitions against incest became embedded in law, and marrying close kin was officially condemned. Yet, as in many cultures, power politics sometimes made exceptions. Certain imperial families ignored these bans when it served dynastic interests, although such cases often caused scandal or criticism. This tension between moral teaching and political ambition shaped Chinese history for centuries. And in neighboring Japan, divine myths shaped early practices, only to later clash with imported philosophies. In Japan, the earliest views of incest were influenced by Shinto mythology. The creation story of Izanagi and Izanami, sibling deities who gave birth to the islands of Japan, offered a divine model that framed close kin unions as part of cosmic order. Early imperial families sometimes followed this example, with sibling marriages used to preserve the sacred status of the throne. However, as Confucian ideas spread from China, attitudes began to change. By the Tokugawa period, laws were introduced to prohibit incest and to promote a more rigid family hierarchy, in line with Confucian moral order. The practice, once tolerated in elite circles, came to be viewed as harmful to social stability. The transition accelerated in the Meiji era, when Japan embraced Western legal codes that explicitly outlawed incest, aligning with global norms. What had once been justified by myth was now redefined as a violation of modern law. While Asia tightened restrictions, medieval Europe struggled with its own contradictions. In medieval Europe, incest became a central issue in the struggle between church authority and royal power. The Christian Church, drawing on biblical texts such as Leviticus, strongly opposed marriage between close relatives. Councils like the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 expanded and clarified bans on consanguinity, giving the Church wide control over who could marry. Yet the rules were not always absolute. Popes often granted dispensations to kings and nobles who needed politically advantageous marriages, allowing unions that would otherwise have been forbidden. At the same time, royal families frequently practiced a different form of inbreeding, repeated marriages within a limited circle of noble houses. The Habsburg dynasty became infamous for this, with a so-called Habsburg jaw, serving as a visible reminder of genetic decline caused by generations of close intermarriage. Scandals and rumors about incestuous unions among rulers fueled criticism of both monarchy and church, helping to shape calls for reform in later centuries. The tension between strict moral codes and political necessity was never fully resolved. But what about religion outside Europe? Both Christianity and Islam laid down strict rules. Religious traditions across the world helped define incest as one of humanity's strongest taboos. In Christianity, the Bible itself contains troubling stories that shaped later debates. Cain's wife, whose identity raised questions about early human kinship, and the account of Lot's daughters, who bore children by their father. While such stories were recorded, Christian teaching developed clear prohibitions against incest, often extending beyond blood relatives to include in-laws. In Islam, Sharia law firmly forbids marriage within close kin, but it goes further by including milk kinship. People who were breastfed by the same woman are also treated as family and thus cannot marry. Hindu traditions, through the Dharma Shastras, likewise condemned incest and insisted on strict rules of exogamy, requiring marriages outside one's immediate kin and often even outside one's clan. In many African societies, incest was among the most serious offenses, punished by banishment, death, or severe ritual cleansing, as it was believed to bring misfortune on the entire community. Across cultures, religion played a decisive role in transforming natural instincts into codified rules. With religion shaping laws, the modern world moved toward codifying incest bans. In the modern era, incest shifted from being largely a matter of religion and tradition to one regulated by science and law. During the 19th and 20th centuries, many countries in Europe and the United States passed strict legal bans against incest, covering not only sexual relations but also marriage between close relatives. These laws reflected both moral beliefs and growing scientific awareness. The rise of genetics in the late 19th century gave biological evidence to long-standing fears, showing how inbreeding increased the likelihood of inherited diseases, deformities, and reduced fertility. This scientific reinforcement made the taboo stronger than ever, giving governments a rational basis for legal prohibitions. Still, cultural variation remained. While most Western nations banned even cousin marriages, in other parts of the world, such as the Middle East, South Asia, and parts of Africa, Cousin unions continued to be accepted or even preferred for reasons of family loyalty and property preservation. Today, incest is almost universally stigmatized, with both legal codes and scientific research standing against it. What began as instinct, and later took religious and political forms, has now been framed by biology and law. So from divine unions to genetic warnings, the story of incest is really the story of how humanity has defined family, power, and morality across time.